Briar kept to the shadows. It was easier that way. Easier to move along the edges of the celebration, invisible among the glittering nobility, unnoticed by wolves, too busy preening and posturing to spare a glance for the scarred servant carrying their wine. She had perfected the art of disappearing over the years, of making herself so small, so quiet, so insignificant that eyes slid past her like water over stone. The scars helped. People didn't like to look at her face, at the twisted ruin that covered the left side from temple to jaw, the remnants of a fire that had nearly killed her as a child. They averted their gazes, uncomfortable with the evidence of violence written so plainly on her skin. She had learned to use that discomfort as armor. Tonight's celebration was grander than most. The Alpha King himself was visiting, the first time in a decade that royalty had graced the Thornhaven Pack with their presence. Every wolf of rank had turned out in their finest silks and jewels, desperate to catch the king's eye, to curry favor, to advance their standing in the endless game of pack politics. Briar wanted nothing to do with any of it. She refilled goblets and cleared empty plates, moving through the crowd like a ghost. The great hall blazed with candlelight, the air thick with perfume and ambition, and the underlying musk of wolves showing off for each other. Somewhere at the head of the room sat the Alpha King himself, though Briar hadn't dared look in his direction. Kings didn't notice servants, and servants who drew attention to themselves tended to regret it. She had just slipped through a side door into the servants' corridor when a hand closed around her arm. "There you are." Lord Garrick's voice oozed over her like rancid oil. Briar's stomach turned as he spun her to face him, his grip tight enough to bruise. He was her Pax Beta, second only to Alpha Corwin himself, and he had been watching her for months with eyes that made her skin crawl. "My lord." She kept her voice flat, her gaze on the floor. "I was just returning to the kitchens." "The kitchens can wait." He backed her against the wall, his body blocking any escape. His breath reeked of wine. "I've been patient with you, Briar, so very patient, but my patience is running thin." Fear coiled in her stomach, cold and familiar. She had been avoiding this confrontation for weeks, dodging his advances, hiding in corners he couldn't reach. But tonight there was nowhere to run. Tonight he had her cornered. "I don't want any trouble," she whispered. "Then don't make any." His hand came up to touch her face, her ruined face, the one most wolves couldn't bear to look at. But Garrick looked. Garrick always looked, with a hunger that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with power. "You should be grateful for my interest. No one else would want something as damaged as you. I'm doing you a kindness." The words cut deep, finding the wounds she had never let heal. Too damaged, too broken, too ruined for anyone to ever truly want. She had told herself those same things 1,000 times, building walls around her heart to protect it from exactly this kind of cruelty. "Please," she said, hating the tremor in her voice, "just let me go." "I don't think so." His grip tightened, and she felt his intent through every point of contact. "Tonight, you're going to stop running. Tonight, you're going to learn your place." She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could escape, the corridor exploded with power. It rolled over them like a wave, heavy and suffocating and utterly overwhelming. Briar felt her knees buckle under the weight of it. Garrick stumbled backward, releasing her, his face draining of color as he turned toward the source. A man stood at the end of the corridor. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black that seemed to drink the torchlight. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, swept back from a face that was brutally handsome, all sharp angles and hard lines, and eyes the color of molten gold. Power radiated from him in waves, pressing against Briar's skin, making her wolf cower and whimper inside her chest. The Alpha King. He was here. He had seen. "Your Majesty." Garrick dropped to his knees, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "I was just—" The servant was— Silence. One word, spoken quietly. but it hit like a thunderclap. Garrick's mouth snapped shut, his whole body trembling with the effort of defying his instinct to flee. The Alpha King walked forward, his golden eyes fixed on Briar with an intensity that stole her breath. She should kneel, should bow her head and bare her throat like a proper wolf. But she couldn't move, could only stand there, frozen, as the most powerful wolf in the kingdom stopped directly in front of her. He raised his hand and she flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his fingers brushed her scarred cheek with impossible gentleness, and the world shifted. Heat lightning blazed through her veins. Her wolf, dormant and broken for so long, suddenly surged to life with a howl that shook her to her core. The mate bond snapped into place between them, golden and fierce and absolutely undeniable. The Alpha King's eyes widened. Something raw and primal crossed his features, shock melting into wonder, melting into a possessive hunger that made her heart stutter. "Mine," he growled, his voice rough with emotion. "You're mine." Briar couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The most powerful wolf in the kingdom had just claimed her, scarred, broken, worthless her, as his mate. And from the look in his golden eyes, he had no intention of letting her go. The silence stretched like a blade. Briar stood frozen against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The Alpha King's hand remained on her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle despite the fury radiating from him in waves. His golden eyes hadn't left her face, not once, not even to glance at the trembling Beta still kneeling on the floor. "Your Majesty," Garrick tried again, his voice thin with terror. "There's been a misunderstanding. The girl is a servant, a nobody. She's nothing to concern yourself with." The king's gaze finally shifted, and Briar felt the loss of his attention like the sun disappearing behind clouds. When he looked at Garrick, his expression turned to something cold and terrible. "Nothing." The word dripped with contempt. "You dare call my mate nothing?" Garrick's face went gray. Your mate? But she's damaged, worthless. She can't possibly be." "Choose your next words very carefully." The king's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Because they may well be your last." Garrick's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. Briar watched in stunned disbelief as the most arrogant wolf she knew cowered like a beaten dog before the Alpha King's wrath. "You touched what is mine." The king stepped away from Briar and toward Garrick, each footfall heavy with menace. "You cornered her, frightened her, put your hands on her with intent to harm." "I didn't know. I couldn't have known." "It wouldn't have mattered." The king stopped directly in front of Garrick, looking down at him with disgust. "Mate or not, she told you no. She asked you to stop, and you refused to listen." His hand shot out and closed around Garrick's throat, lifting him off his knees like he weighed nothing. "In my kingdom, wolves who prey on those weaker than themselves are dealt with swiftly." "Please," Garrick choked out. "Mercy." "Did you show her mercy?" The king's grip tightened. "Did you show mercy to any of the others you've tormented over the years? Did you think I wouldn't hear the whispers about the Thornhaven Beta who takes what he wants from those who cannot fight back?" Briar's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold stone floor, her whole body trembling. The king knew. He knew about Garrick's predations, knew about the servants and low-ranking wolves who had suffered under his cruelty. And he cared. "I should kill you here and now," the king said quietly. "But death would be too quick, too kind." He released Garrick, letting him crumple to the floor in a gasping heap. "Instead, you will be stripped of your rank, your lands, your name. You will spend the rest of your days in the mines beneath the northern mountains, where you will learn what it truly means to be powerless." "You can't," Garrick wheezed. "Alpha Corwin will never allow—" "Alpha Corwin will do as he's told, or he'll join you." The king's voice brooked no argument. Guards! Two massive wolves in royal livery appeared at the end of the corridor, as if they had been waiting for the summons. They seized Garrick by the arms and dragged him away, his protests fading into the distance until the corridor fell silent once more. Briar sat on the floor, shaking, unable to process what had just happened. One moment she had been trapped, cornered, facing a nightmare she had dreaded for months. The next, the Alpha King himself had appeared like something out of a fever dream, claiming her as his mate and destroying her tormentor with a handful of words. It couldn't be real. None of this could be real. Briar. She looked up. The king had crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. This close, she could see the concern in his golden eyes, the way his harsh features had softened into something almost gentle. "That's your name, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "I heard him say it." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm Declan." He held out his hand, palm up, an offer rather than a command. "Declan Ashworth, and I believe I owe you an explanation." "An explanation?" she repeated numbly. "For what?" "For claiming you in a corridor without your permission, for turning your entire life upside down in the span of a few heartbeats." A rueful smile crossed his lips. "I've imagined finding my mate for 20 years. I never expected it to happen quite like this." 20 years. He had been waiting 20 years for her. The thought was too enormous to comprehend. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. I can't be. Look at me." She gestured to her scarred face, her servant's dress, her trembling hands. "I'm no one. I'm nothing. I'm broken." Something fierce flashed in his golden eyes. He reached out and cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing gently over her cheekbones, including the ruined one, the one everyone else flinched away from. "You are not nothing," he said firmly. "You are not broken, and you are certainly not a mistake." His gaze held hers with burning intensity. "You are my mate, my fated, the other half of my soul, and I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worthy of being loved." Tears spilled down Briar's cheeks before she could stop them. She had spent so long building walls, convincing herself that love was for other wolves, beautiful wolves, whole wolves. And now this king was kneeling before her in a servant's corridor, looking at her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. "Come with me," Declan said softly. "Let me take you away from this place. Let me show you what your life could be." She should refuse. Should insist that he was wrong, that the bond was a fluke, that she could never be what he needed. But his hands were warm on her face, and the mate bond was singing in her chest, and her wolf was whimpering with desperate, hopeful need. "Yes," she heard herself whisper. "I'll come with you." And the Alpha King smiled like she had just given him the world. The royal palace was nothing like Briar had imagined. She had expected cold grandeur, intimidating and unwelcoming. Instead, the great stone walls were softened by climbing roses, their winter-dormant vines promising spring beauty. Warm light spilled from every window, and the wolves who lined the courtyard to greet their king looked at her with curiosity rather than disgust. But not all the faces were friendly. Briar noticed them immediately, the noblewomen in their fine silks, their eyes raking over her scarred face and servant's dress with barely concealed contempt. She heard the whispers starting before she had even stepped down from the carriage, carried on the winter wind like poison. "That's his mate? Surely not!" Look at her face. How could he possibly want... She must have bewitched him somehow. There's no other explanation. Declan's hand found hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "Ignore them," he murmured, helping her down from the carriage. "They're jealous and petty, and their opinions mean nothing." "They're your court," she whispered back. "Their opinions matter." "Not to me." His golden eyes met hers with fierce intensity. "The only opinion that matters is yours. and I intend to change it, starting today." He led her through the palace with her hand tucked securely in his arm, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed in their wake. Briar kept her chin high despite the urge to shrink into herself, to disappear the way she had learned to do at Thornhaven. She was done being invisible. She just had to learn how to be seen. The chambers he brought her to stole her breath. They were enormous, decorated in shades of cream and gold that caught the firelight and seemed to glow. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled with furs and silk pillows. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the palace gardens, and a door in the far wall stood open to reveal what looked like a private bathing room, larger than the entire servants' quarters she had shared with 3 other wolves back home. "These are mine?" she asked, her voice small with disbelief. "These are ours." Declan gestured to a connecting door. "My chambers are through there. I thought—" He paused, something almost like uncertainty crossing his features. "I wanted you close, but if you'd prefer more distance, I can have other rooms prepared." He was giving her a choice. After claiming her so fiercely in that corridor, he was offering her the option to put space between them. The kindness of it made her chest ache. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." Relief flickered in his eyes, quickly hidden. "There will be servants to attend you, a seamstress to take your measurements for new gowns. Anything you need, you have only to ask." "I don't need—" "You need everything." His voice gentled. "You've spent your life being denied the basics of comfort and dignity. Let me give them to you now. Please." Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. A woman entered without waiting for permission. Tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the same golden shade as Declan's. She wore her authority like a crown, and her gaze swept over Briar with cool assessment. "So this is the mate you found skulking in a servant's corridor." Her voice was smooth and cutting. How delightfully unexpected. "Mother." There was warning in Declan's tone. "This is Briar, my fated mate. You will treat her with the respect that title deserves." "I'm merely curious." The Queen Mother circled Briar slowly, examining her from every angle. "She's certainly not what anyone expected. Scarred, common, trembling like a leaf." She stopped directly in front of Briar and tilted her head. "Tell me, girl, what makes you worthy of my son?" The question hit like a slap. Briar felt the old shame rising, the familiar voice whispering that she wasn't worthy, could never be worthy, that she should run before they discovered the truth of her broken uselessness. But something else rose alongside the shame, something fiercer, something that had been kindled in a dark corridor when a king touched her ruined face and called her his. "I don't know if I'm worthy," Briar said quietly, "but your son seems to think I am, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to prove him right." Silence stretched through the chamber. The Queen Mother's eyes narrowed, searching Briar's face for something, weakness, perhaps, or deception. Whatever she found made her lips curve into a small, reluctant smile. "Spine," she said. "Good. You'll need it to survive this court." She turned to Declan. "She may do after all. If she doesn't break first." Then she swept out of the room, leaving tension crackling in her wake. Briar let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, but she had held her ground. She had faced the Queen Mother and hadn't crumbled. Declan moved to stand before her, his expression soft with something that looked like pride. "That was impressive," he said. "Most wolves cower before my mother. I've had practice standing in front of people who want me to break." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "She's not the worst I've faced." Something dark and dangerous flickered in his golden eyes. "The wolves who hurt you," he said quietly. "Tell me their names. All of them." "Why?" "Because I intend to make them answer for every cruelty, every scar, Every moment they made you feel less than what you are. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. You're safe now, Briar, and I will burn the world before I let anyone hurt you again. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She actually believed him. The days that followed were unlike anything Briar had ever experienced. She woke each morning in silk sheets instead of scratchy wool. Servants brought her breakfast in bed, actual food, hot and plentiful, not the cold scraps she had survived on at Thornhaven. A seamstress arrived with fabric samples in jewel tones she had never dared to dream of wearing. And Declan visited her chambers each evening, sitting with her by the fire, asking questions about her day, learning the small details of her life as if they truly mattered. On the fifth night, he finally asked about the scars. They were sitting in the window seat of her chambers, watching the snow fall over the palace gardens. Briar had grown comfortable enough to let silences stretch between them, no longer feeling the need to fill every moment with nervous chatter. But when Declan reached out and traced a gentle finger along the edge of her scarred cheek, she felt herself tense. You don't have to tell me, he said quietly, but I want to know, if you're willing. She had never told anyone the full story, had never trusted anyone enough to share the worst moment of her life. But Declan had been patient with her, kind to her, and the mate bond was humming between them with a warmth that made her want to let him in. I was 7, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. My parents were healers, low-ranking but respected. We lived in a small cottage at the edge of Thornhaven territory. Declan's hand found hers, anchoring her. There was a dispute with a neighboring pack. I never understood the details, politics, territory, the usual reasons wolves kill each other. One night, they came for us, set fire to our home while we slept. She swallowed hard, the memories rising like smoke. My parents got me out, but the roof collapsed before they could follow. I was trapped in the doorway. The flames... Her voice broke. She couldn't continue. The flames touched your face, Declan finished softly. And no one helped you. The pack elders found me in the morning. I don't remember much after that, just pain and healers who said I was lucky to be alive. A bitter laugh escaped her. Lucky? They called me lucky while half my face melted into something no one could bear to look at. Declan was silent for a long moment. When she finally gathered the courage to look at him, she found his golden eyes blazing with barely contained fury. And after? He asked, his voice rough. Who raised you? No one, really. I was passed from family to family, whoever needed an extra pair of hands. I learned to work, to be useful, to stay quiet and invisible so no one would remember I existed. She stared at their joined hands. It was easier that way. Less painful than hoping someone might actually want me. Briar. He shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her scarred cheek. Look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly. I want you. The words were fierce and certain. Every part of you, including these scars that mark you as a survivor, including every wound and shadow and broken piece you think makes you unworthy. His thumb traced the ruined skin with impossible tenderness. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I will tell you that every day until you believe it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. How can you say that? You could have anyone. Noble women, beautiful women, wolves who aren't... I don't want anyone else. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her scarred temple, the gentlest kiss she had ever received. I want my mate. I want you. Something cracked inside her chest. The wall she had built to protect herself, brick by brick over 20 years of loneliness. It crumbled under the weight of his words, his touch, the truth she could feel pulsing through the mate bond between them. Tell me about you, she whispered, desperate to shift the focus before she fell apart completely. Tell me why you were searching for so long." Declan pulled back slightly, his expression growing shadowed. "I was betrothed once. An arranged match, political in nature. Lady Corinne of the Eastern Reaches." His jaw tightened. "She was beautiful and ambitious and utterly devoid of warmth. I convinced myself I could learn to love her." "What happened?" "She tried to poison me on our wedding night." Briar's breath caught. "What?" "She was working with a faction of nobles who wanted to claim the throne. They believed that with me dead and Corinne as grieving widow, they could manipulate her into giving them power." A grim smile crossed his lips. "They underestimated my tolerance for wolfsbane. I survived. She did not." The parallel struck her like lightning. Both of them betrayed. Both of them scarred by wolves who should have protected them. Both of them learning to survive in a world that seemed determined to break them. "We're the same," she said softly. "Both broken. Both alone." "We were alone." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "We're not anymore." She closed her eyes and let his warmth seep into her. For the first time since she was 7 years old, Briar allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found someone who could love her as she was. Scars and all. 2 weeks after her arrival, Declan took her to the palace gardens. It was a rare, clear night, the winter sky blazing with stars, the snow glittering like scattered diamonds under the moonlight. He had wrapped her in furs and led her through paths she hadn't yet explored, until they reached a clearing where a frozen fountain stood silent and beautiful, ice crystals catching the starlight. "This was my sanctuary when I was young," he said, guiding her to a stone bench that had been cleared of snow. "When the pressures of court became too much, I would come here to breathe." Briar looked around at the peaceful beauty, her breath misting in the cold air. "I understand why. It's like another world. I've never brought anyone here before." His golden eyes found hers in the darkness. "I wanted to share it with you." Something warm unfurled in her chest. Over the past 2 weeks, Declan had given her countless gifts, gowns and jewels and luxuries she had never imagined. But this felt different. This was a piece of himself, a secret corner of his heart that he was opening just for her. "Thank you," she whispered. He shifted closer on the bench, his thigh pressing against hers through the layers of fur and silk. The mate bond hummed between them, growing stronger each day, demanding acknowledgement that neither of them had yet given it. "Briar." His voice was rough. "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" "I've been patient. I've tried to give you time, to let you adjust, to not push for more than you're ready to give." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "But I find myself reaching the limits of my restraint. Declan, I think about you constantly. When we're apart, my wolf paces and snarls until I can see you again. When we're together, it takes every ounce of my control not to touch you, hold you, claim you in every way the bond demands." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the edge of her scars. "I'm falling in love with you, Briar. Not because of the bond, because of who you are." Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. "You can't mean that." "I've never meant anything more." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cold lips. "Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't feel this, and I'll pull back. I'll wait as long as you need. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel—" She kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate, and fueled by years of loneliness finally breaking against the shore of something real. She fisted her hands in his cloak and pulled him closer, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. For a heartbeat, he was frozen with surprise. Then a growl rumbled through his chest, and he was kissing her back with a ferocity that stole her breath. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her onto his lap, his hands tangling in her hair as he tilted her head to deepen the kiss. He tasted like winter wine and wanting, and when his tongue swept against hers, she felt the mate bond ignite between them like wildfire. She gasped against his mouth, overwhelmed by the sensation. Through the bond, she could feel his emotions, desire and tenderness, and a love so vast it brought tears to her eyes. He wanted her, truly wanted her. Not despite her scars, but including them, as part of the whole complicated, broken, beautiful person she was. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. His golden eyes were blazing, his wolf so close to the surface she could see it looking out at her with fierce, possessive joy. "I love you," she breathed, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I didn't think I could. I didn't think I was capable of it anymore. But I love you, Declan." His answering smile was radiant. "Say it again. I love you." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise sealed between their lips. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her scarred cheek with reverent gentleness. "I love you too," he murmured. "My brave, beautiful mate. I love you too." They sat together in the frozen garden until the cold finally drove them inside, wrapped in each other's arms, the mate bond singing between them like a symphony. And for the first time in her life, Briar understood what it meant to be truly seen and loved anyway. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the moon. It sounded like joy. The happiness lasted 3 perfect weeks. 3 weeks of stolen kisses in shadowed alcoves, of Declan's hand finding hers beneath the table during formal dinners, of falling asleep in his arms and waking to his golden eyes watching her with an adoration that still stole her breath. Briar had never known such contentment existed. She had never dared to imagine that life could feel like this. But she should have known that wolves who had suffered as much as she had didn't get to keep their happiness. The trouble began with Lady Seraphine. She was everything Briar was not, beautiful and polished, with porcelain skin and raven hair that cascaded in perfect waves down her back. She moved through the court like she owned it, and from the whispers Briar had gathered, she very nearly had. Lady Seraphine had been the leading candidate to become Declan's queen before Briar's arrival. She had spent years positioning herself, cultivating alliances, waiting for the king to finally give up on finding his fated mate and settle for a political match instead. And then Briar had appeared, and all those careful plans had crumbled to dust. The first confrontation came in the palace library. Briar had escaped there to find peace from the constant stares and whispers, losing herself in books she had never been allowed to read as a servant. She was curled in a window seat, absorbed in a volume of poetry, when a shadow fell across the page. "So this is where the king's little pet hides." Lady Seraphine stood over her, flanked by 2 noblewomen whose names Briar couldn't remember. All 3 wore expressions of barely concealed contempt. "My lady." Briar closed her book and rose, her heart beginning to pound. "Can I help you?" "Help me?" Seraphine laughed, cold and musical. "You've already done quite enough, haven't you? Slithering out of whatever gutter you came from and bewitching the king with your pathetic victim act." "I haven't bewitched anyone." "Please." Seraphine's lip curled. "You expect us to believe that the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, would genuinely choose a scarred, broken servant over a noblewoman of impeccable breeding? Over me?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "He feels sorry for you. That's all this is. Pity dressed up as a mate bond. And when he realizes his mistake, when he sees what everyone else already knows, that you're worthless and unworthy and could never be a proper queen, he'll discard you like the refuse you are." The words sank into Briar like poison, finding every crack in her armor, every wound she had tried to heal, because some part of her believed them. Some part of her had always believed them. "You don't know anything about us," she managed, her voice barely steady. I know enough. Seraphine smiled, sharp as a blade. Enjoy your borrowed time, little servant. It won't last. She swept away, her companions following, their cruel laughter echoing off the library walls. Briar sank back onto the window seat, trembling, the old voices rising in her head. Too broken, too damaged, too ruined for anyone to truly want. What if Seraphine was right? What if the mate bond was blinding Declan to what she really was? What if one day he woke up and realized he had shackled himself to a scarred nobody when he could have had anyone? She couldn't face him that night. When he came to her chambers, she claimed a headache and sent him away, unable to meet his concerned golden eyes. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to silence the doubts that Seraphine had planted so expertly. The following days brought more attacks. A gown arrived for a state dinner, slashed to ribbons, a note pinned to the fabric reading, "You don't belong here." Servants who had been friendly suddenly turned cold, their whispers falling silent when she approached. Rumors began circulating through the court that Briar had trapped the king through dark magic, that her scars were punishment for witchcraft, that she would bring ruin to the realm. And Briar, who had spent her whole life being told she was worthless, began to believe it. On the 5th day, she made a decision. She would leave, slip away in the night before she could damage Declan's reign any further. He would be angry at first, hurt perhaps, but eventually he would see that she had done him a kindness. He would find a proper queen, someone beautiful and whole, someone who could give him the partnership he deserved, someone who wasn't broken. She was packing a small bag when the connecting door opened and Declan walked in. He took in the scene with one glance: the bag, the cloak laid out on the bed, the guilty terror on her face, and his expression hardened into something she had never seen before. "What are you doing?" "Declan, Are you leaving me?" The words came out rough, almost broken. "Were you going to disappear without even saying goodbye?" Tears burned in her eyes. "It's better this way. You deserve—" "Don't." He crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Don't you dare tell me what I deserve. Don't you dare try to make this choice for me. You don't understand. The things they're saying. The things Seraphine—" "Seraphine!" His eyes flashed with sudden, terrible fury. "What did she say to you?" The whole story poured out of her. The confrontation in the library, the destroyed gown, the rumors, the campaign of cruelty that had been slowly dismantling her piece by piece. By the time she finished, Declan was shaking with barely contained rage. "I'm going to destroy her," he said quietly. "I'm going to ruin her so completely that her own family won't speak her name." "Declan, no." His voice cracked like a whip. "You are my mate, my chosen, my queen, and anyone who tries to drive you away from me will learn exactly what happens to wolves who threaten what is mine." His grip on her face gentled, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I love you, Briar. Not despite your scars or your past or the broken pieces you think make you unworthy. Because of them. Because they made you who you are." "What if she's right?" The whisper escaped before she could stop it. "What if I'm not enough?" "Then we'll be not enough together." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever. Do you understand?" She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, letting the mate bond pulse with his fierce, unwavering love. "Yes," she breathed. "I understand." But somewhere in the palace, Lady Seraphine was planning her next move. And this time, the consequences would be far more devastating than cruel words and ruined gowns. The attack came 3 nights later. Briar was walking back to her chambers from the library, a book tucked under her arm, her mind pleasantly occupied with thoughts of Declan. He had been meeting with foreign ambassadors all day, but he had promised to come to her tonight. The anticipation of seeing him warmed her from the inside out. She never saw the figures step out of the shadows. Hands grabbed her from behind, clamping over her mouth before she could scream. She was dragged into an empty corridor, her book clattering to the floor, her struggles useless against the strength of her attackers. There were 3 of them, masked, their scents disguised by herbs, their grips bruising and merciless. Hold her still! Lady Seraphine emerged from the darkness, her beautiful face twisted with malice. In her hand, she held a vial of something that glowed faintly in the torchlight. Did you really think I would let you take what's mine? Seraphine stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. Did you think your precious king could protect you forever? Briar fought against the hands holding her, terror clawing at her chest. What are you doing? Correcting a mistake. Seraphine uncorked the vial. This is essence of nightshade, mixed with wolfsbane. Not enough to kill you. That would be too suspicious. But enough to make you very, very sick. Enough to put you in a fever sleep for days, perhaps weeks. Her smile sharpened. Long enough for me to convince the king that you've abandoned him, that you fled in the night, just like you were planning to before. By the time you wake, if you wake, he'll have moved on. He'll never believe you. He will when I show him the note you left. Seraphine produced a piece of parchment from her bodice. Quite touching, really. All about how you realized you could never be what he needed. How you're setting him free to find a proper queen. She laughed at the horror on Briar's face. My forger is very talented. Even Declan won't be able to tell the difference. Briar's mind raced desperately. The guards holding her were too strong. Seraphine was too close, and no one knew where she was. Declan will find out the truth, she gasped. He'll what? Tear apart the palace looking for you? Search every inch of the kingdom? Seraphine's eyes glittered. You'll be hidden somewhere he'll never think to look. And while he's grieving his lost mate, I'll be there to comfort him. To remind him that he deserves better than a scarred little servant. She grabbed Briar's chin, forcing her head back. Now open your mouth or my friends will open it for you. The vial pressed against Briar's lips. She clamped her jaw shut, fighting with everything she had, but the guards wrenched her head back and forced her mouth open. The liquid poured down her throat, bitter and burning, and almost immediately the world began to blur. Sweet dreams, Seraphine whispered. If you're lucky, you'll never wake up at all. The corridor tilted. Briar's legs buckled. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Seraphine's triumphant smile. She woke in hell. The room was small and dark, lit only by a single guttering candle. Stone walls pressed close on every side, damp and cold, smelling of mold and despair. Briar tried to move and found her hands bound, her body weak, her mind foggy from whatever poison still lingered in her system. How long had she been unconscious? Days? Weeks? The mate bond felt distant and muted, as if something was blocking it. She reached for Declan through the connection and found only silence. Tears burned in her eyes. Seraphine had won. The forged note would convince Declan that she had left him, and he would never know the truth. He would think she had abandoned him just like everyone else in his life. He would think she hadn't loved him enough to stay. The thought was worse than any physical pain. She curled into herself on the cold stone floor and wept, grief and despair washing over her in waves. She had finally found love. Finally found someone who saw past her scars to the woman beneath. And now it had been ripped away by a jealous noblewoman who couldn't accept that fate had chosen someone else. Hours passed, days, perhaps. Briar lost track of time in the endless darkness. Her captors brought her water occasionally and scraps of bread that tasted like ash. No one spoke to her. No one answered her questions about where she was or what was happening above. She began to lose hope. Maybe Seraphine was right. Maybe she was worthless after all. Maybe she deserved to rot in this dungeon, forgotten and alone, while the world moved on without her. Maybe Declan was better off believing she had left. At least then his memories of her would be of someone who chose to go, rather than someone too weak to fight back. The darkness pressed closer, and Briar felt herself beginning to break. But somewhere above, in the palace she had been stolen from, the Alpha King was tearing apart the kingdom to find her. Because Declan Ashworth had known the moment he read that note that something was wrong. His mate would never leave him, not without saying goodbye to his face, and whoever had taken her was about to learn exactly what happened when someone stole from the king. The door exploded inward. Briar flinched away from the sudden flood of torchlight, her eyes burning after so long in darkness. She heard shouting, the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves in combat, and then, cutting through the chaos like a blade, Briar! Declan's voice. Declan's face, appearing in the doorway, his features twisted with fury and fear and desperate relief. He crossed the cell in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as they cupped her face. "I found you," his voice cracked. "Thank the gods, I found you." She couldn't speak, could only stare at him through the haze of poison and despair, convinced she was hallucinating. He couldn't be here. He was supposed to think she had left him. He was supposed to move on with Seraphine and forget she ever existed. "You came," she managed, the words barely a whisper. "The note, I thought—" The note was a lie. He was already cutting through her bindings, his movements swift and sure despite the tremor in his hands. "I knew it the moment I read it. You would never leave me like that. You would never leave me at all." "How did you find me?" Seraphine made a mistake. A savage smile crossed his face. "She bribed one of my guards to help with the kidnapping. He broke under questioning and confessed everything. The poison, the forged note, this location." He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "I've had her arrested. She's in the dungeon now, awaiting judgment." Briar clung to him, her whole body shaking. The mate bond roared back to life between them, no longer muted by distance and drugs. She could feel his emotions pouring through, rage and relief and love so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured against her hair. "For 3 days, I tore this kingdom apart searching. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I couldn't breathe without you." 3 days. She had lost 3 days to that cold, dark cell. 3 days of believing she would die alone and forgotten. Never again. He pulled back to look at her, his golden eyes blazing with intensity. "I will never let anyone hurt you again. I swear it on my life." He lifted her into his arms and carried her out of the dungeon, into fresh air and sunlight that made her weep with relief. His guards surrounded them, a protective wall of muscle and steel, escorting them back toward the palace. Word had already spread. Servants and nobles alike lined the corridors, their faces a mix of shock and relief as their king carried his rescued mate through the halls. Briar buried her face in Declan's chest, overwhelmed by the attention, but he held her tighter. "Let them see," he said quietly. "Let them see what happens when someone tries to take you from me. Let them see how much you matter." He took her to his own chambers, not hers, his, and laid her gently on his bed. Healers arrived within moments, clucking and fussing over her condition. The poison had done damage, they said, but nothing that rest and care couldn't heal. She would recover fully within a week. Declan never left her side. On the second day, when she was strong enough to sit up, he told her about the trial. Seraphine confessed everything: the harassment, the forged note, the kidnapping. She thought if she could drive you away, I would eventually choose her. His jaw tightened. She was wrong. "What will happen to her?" "Exile. She and her entire family have been stripped of their lands and titles and banished from the kingdom." His golden eyes met hers. "I wanted to execute her. My wolf demanded blood for what she did to you. But my mother convinced me that death would make her a martyr. This way, she lives with the consequences of her choices, powerless, forgotten, watching from a distance as the woman she tried to destroy becomes queen. Briar's breath caught. Queen? Did you think I would let you go after all this? He moved to sit beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. Briar, I almost lost you. I spent 3 days believing I might never see you again, and it nearly destroyed me. I am not waiting another moment to make you mine in every way that matters. Declan, I love you. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love your scars and your strength and the way you smile when you think no one is watching. I love that you survived things that would have broken anyone else. I love that you chose to trust me despite every reason not to. He pulled back, his expression fierce and tender all at once. Marry me, be my queen. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you were always enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, Declan, I'll marry you. He kissed her then, gentle and fierce and full of promise, and when he pulled back, his golden eyes were shining with a joy she had never seen before. There's one more thing, he murmured. If you're ready. She knew what he was asking. The mark, the claiming that would seal their bond forever, that would tie their souls together for eternity. I'm ready, she whispered. I've been ready since the moment you found me in that corridor. He tilted her head gently, baring the curve of her neck. His lips brushed her skin, warm and reverent, and she shivered with anticipation. Then his teeth sank in, and the world exploded into golden light. The mate bond completed itself in a rush of sensation that stole her breath. She felt him, truly felt him, his love and devotion and fierce protectiveness wrapping around her like armor. And she poured herself back into him, all her fear and hope and hard-won strength. Mine, he growled against her throat. Yours, she breathed. Forever. And in the king's chambers, wrapped in her mate's arms, Briar finally understood that she had never been broken at all. She had just been waiting for someone strong enough to see the beauty in her cracks. 1 week later, the Alpha King summoned the entire court to the throne room. Briar stood at his side, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that made her eyes shine like forest pools. The seamstress had offered to design a neckline that would hide her mating mark, but Briar had refused. She wanted everyone to see, wanted them to know, beyond any doubt, that she belonged to Declan and he belonged to her. The hall was packed with nobles, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Word of Lady Seraphine's exile had spread like wildfire, and the court was still reeling from the scandal. Everyone knew that the king had torn apart the kingdom to find his mate. Everyone knew what he had done to those who had conspired against her. Declan stepped forward, and the room fell silent. I have called you here today to make an announcement. His voice carried through the hall, powerful and commanding. As many of you know, my mate was taken from me by wolves who believed they could destroy our bond through cruelty and deception. They failed. His hand found Briar's, his grip warm and steady. Lady Briar is not just my mate. She is my chosen queen, my partner in all things, and in 3 days' time, she will become my wife. His golden eyes swept across the crowd, daring anyone to object. I expect every wolf in this court to treat her with the respect her position demands. Anyone who fails to do so will answer to me personally. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single wolf began to clap. Others joined, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Within moments, the entire hall was applauding, the sound washing over Briar like a wave. She blinked back tears, overwhelmed. These wolves, many of whom had whispered about her, doubted her, looked at her scars with barely concealed disgust, were cheering for her, accepting her, welcoming her as their queen. The Queen Mother approached the dais, her expression unreadable. Briar tensed, preparing for another cutting remark, another test of her worthiness. Instead, the older woman took her hands and squeezed them gently. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly, low enough that only Briar and Declan could hear. "I thought you were weak. I thought you would break under the pressure of this court." A small smile curved her lips. "Instead, you endured kidnapping and poison and emerged stronger than before. That is the mark of a true queen." "Thank you," Briar managed, her voice thick. "Don't thank me yet." The Queen Mother's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "Wedding preparations begin tomorrow, and I intend to be insufferably involved in every detail. You may regret my approval before this is over." Despite herself, Briar laughed. It felt strange and wonderful, laughing in the throne room with her mate's hand in hers and the court's applause still ringing in her ears. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Seamstresses descended on Briar's chambers with bolts of white silk and lace so delicate it looked like spun moonlight. Florists presented arrangements of winter roses and silver-leafed ivy. The palace kitchens worked around the clock, preparing a feast that would feed the entire kingdom. And through it all, Declan remained at her side, stealing kisses in quiet corners, holding her hand during endless meetings, reminding her with every touch that she was loved. On the night before the wedding, he came to her chambers with a small velvet box. "I wanted to give you this in private," he said, pressing it into her hands, "before everything becomes official and public and overwhelming." Briar opened the box and gasped. Inside lay a circlet of silver and diamonds, delicate as frost on a winter morning. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It was my grandmother's," Declan said softly. "She wore it on her wedding day, and her mother before her. It's been waiting for the right queen." He lifted the circlet from its box and settled it gently on her head. "Now it's found her." Tears spilled down Briar's cheeks. "Declan, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll wear it tomorrow. Say you'll stand beside me in front of the entire kingdom and let me make you my wife." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Say you'll let me love you for the rest of our lives." "Yes." The word came out strong and sure. Yes to all of it. Yes, forever. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And when he pulled back, his golden eyes were shining with a joy that matched her own. "Tomorrow," he murmured against her lips. "Tomorrow," she agreed. She barely slept that night. But for the first time in her life, it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was anticipation. It was hope. It was the overwhelming certainty that after years of darkness, she had finally found her way into the light. And tomorrow, the whole world would know it. The wedding was everything Briar had never dared to dream of. She walked down the aisle of the great temple on legs that barely trembled, her white silk gown trailing behind her like a river of moonlight. The grandmother's circlet rested on her brow, diamonds catching the candlelight and scattering rainbows across the ancient stone walls. Every seat was filled with wolves who had come from across the kingdom to witness their king marry his fated mate. And at the end of the aisle, dressed in ceremonial black with a crown of silver on his dark hair, Declan waited for her with golden eyes that held nothing but love. She had worried, in the anxious hours before dawn, that she would feel like a fraud. That standing before the kingdom in a queen's gown, she would still feel like the scarred servant who had hidden in shadows and prayed for invisibility. But as she walked toward her mate, something settled inside her chest, a quiet certainty that she belonged here, that she had always been walking toward this moment, through years of pain and loneliness, through fire and fear, and finally into the light. When she reached the dais, Declan took her hands in his. His grip was steady and warm, anchoring her to the present, to him, to the life they were building together. "You're breathtaking," he murmured, low enough for only her to hear. "I don't deserve you." "You do," she whispered back. "We deserve each other." The ceremony was traditional and beautiful, ancient words spoken by the high priest while the court looked on. But Briar barely heard any of it. She was lost in Declan's eyes, in the mate bond pulsing between them, in the overwhelming reality that this was actually happening. She was marrying the Alpha King. She was becoming a queen. When the priest declared them wed, Declan kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The court erupted into cheers, the sound echoing off the temple walls like thunder. And when they turned to face their people, her people now, Briar found herself smiling so hard her cheeks ached. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was feasting and dancing and more joy than Briar had ever experienced. Nobles who had once whispered about her scars now bowed and called her Your Majesty. Servants who had been her equals mere months ago looked at her with something like wonder. And through it all, Declan never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always returning to her face. It was near midnight when she finally pulled him aside, into a quiet alcove away from the noise and the crowds. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. Concern flickered across his features. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "I'm perfectly well." She took his hands and pressed them to her stomach. "Better than well, actually. The healer confirmed it this morning." For a moment, Declan simply stared at her. Then understanding dawned in his golden eyes, and his expression transformed into something radiant. Wonder and joy and a love so vast it stole her breath. "A child," he breathed. "We're having a child." "We're having a child," she confirmed, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She felt his emotions flooding through the mate bond, overwhelming gratitude, fierce protectiveness, and a happiness so pure it made her soul sing. "I love you," he said roughly, pulling back to cup her scarred face in his hands. "I love you so much it terrifies me. You've given me everything, Briar. A mate, a queen, a family." His thumb traced her scars with reverent gentleness. "I spent 20 years searching for you, and you were worth every moment of the wait." She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her love into the press of her lips against his. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me in that corridor, for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me when I thought I was too broken to be loved." "You were never broken." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You were just waiting for someone who understood that scars are proof of survival. And survival, my love, is beautiful." Outside the alcove, the celebration continued. Music swelled and wolves laughed and the kingdom rejoiced for their king and his new queen. But in that quiet moment, wrapped in the arms of her mate, Briar needed nothing else. She had spent her whole life believing she was worthless, believing her scars made her unlovable, believing that happiness was something meant for other wolves, whole wolves, beautiful wolves. She had been wrong. And as the Alpha King held her close, their child growing safely beneath her heart, Briar finally understood what it meant to be truly, completely, unconditionally loved. The end.